It's okay. We got this. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We'll let the audiences trickle into our webinar today. We're talking about our latest launch at Hex called Context Suggestions. We've got a very special guest who's going to be sharing a real life story. We're really excited to have him on board. So thank you so much, Steve. As you're coming in, pop in the chat where you're joining us from, what you're excited to hear most about. And then we'll get things kicked off here in another minute or two. Hopefully, Steve, your Wednesday is going well.
Indeed.
Can't complain. Amazing. Well, let us know where you're coming from. There should be a little chat on the right-hand side of the screen. You're welcome to use that. And we've also got a Q&A section. So as we're having our conversation today, we'd love to get any questions from the audience that we can answer at the end of the session. But for now, we're just going to wait maybe another 30 or so seconds. We've got a lot of content to cover. So let's see. Okay. Great. Oh, perfect. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing really quick and live make a quick edit to our deck because I want to make sure it is accurate. Cool. But yeah, okay, come on, guys, in the chat. You guys can tell us where you're coming from. It's okay. We won't bite. Cool. Okay. Let's see. One thing I think is always fun is to do things live inside of a webinar. I just like to keep things interesting for myself. Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to get started here in just a second after I hit this big red button. Let's see. Okay, amazing. Okay, yay, we got people. Toronto, Austin, amazing. Lots of cool places. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for spending your Wednesday with us as we talk about Context Suggestions, the latest launch from Hex. So I'll go ahead and share my screen really quickly. And most especially, we're excited to have this conversation because we've also got a customer today, SeatGeek, who is using this new launch in a really interesting, cool way. And so we'll definitely have some time today to get into that story. But first off, our speakers for today, we have Steve Ritter. He is the Chief Data Officer at SeatGeek and has so graciously given us some of his time. And then my name is Rachel Ferreira. I am a product evangelist at Hex. So I get the distinct pleasure hosting things like this and sort of telling the story of how Hex helps customers and companies do really cool stuff with data and AI. And the agenda we'll follow is we're going to talk quickly about, what is this launch? What are context suggestions, if you're not familiar? Just give you sort of a quick overview of how they actually work under the hood. So you get a sense of how all this information is flowing from one thing to the other. And then I'll turn it over to Steve to share his story of how SeatGeek is thinking about context, curating it, and incorporating it into larger workflows via our CLI and using our new suggestions feature. And then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Sounds like a pretty awesome agenda. So let's dive in. The first thing I want to cover is, if you're not familiar, Hex is an AI analytics platform. So we give teams the ability to build really deep analysis with AI augmented data tools. So if you're a data analyst, data scientist, et cetera. And then we also have our conversational self-serve for everybody else to come in and ask and answer their own questions with data. And all of that is supported by this sort of central idea of a compounding context engine that teams can curate and leverage to make sure that their answers are trusted, no matter what kind of work they're doing in Hex. And when we think about context and kind of getting a good answer from AI, a really simple question like, how many customers do we have, can end up being pretty challenging because there needs to be a lot of context under the covers to make sure that you're getting a good answer, and you need to do a lot of that setup ahead of time. While that's still important, we also think that there's a need to actually have sort of the context be self-learning. So there's a process going on behind the scenes that's sort of discovering all of the little signals and pushback that individuals could give an agent, or the confusion that an agent could run into. And that needs to be fed back into the context layer so that the system can sort of get smarter the more that you use it. So we felt like this was something that we could definitely take advantage of and tackle. And so that's exactly what we've built. We're calling it Context Suggestions. And basically, it sort of takes that last mile of a user had a question, or maybe something was unclear. The agent sends some confusion, and then it's surfacing these warnings. It's sort of triaging all of these conversations, clustering them into topics. And then now all of that can be created or transformed into this like context suggestion that our review agent actually creates for you. And those suggestions are basically ways that you can improve your context to make sure that the agent gives a better answer next time. And so just to illustrate a little bit further, I'd love to show you just like really briefly in Hex what this could look like. Let me see here. Okay. So if I'm in like our Hex demo environment, when I say Context Studio, that lives over here. And it sort of gives me like a 360-degree view of all of the different agent conversations happening within my workspace. And the new, kind of the net new feature here is over here, we're calling it Suggestions. And so while I have all these topics occurring, maybe they're triggering warnings, meaning users got confused or an agent didn't have enough context. Now, instead of like individually going into every single thread, trying to figure out what could have been better or what I could do to help improve this agent's response, I can go into Suggestions, which is sort of like a feed of all of the things that the agent is finding in all of these different conversations that could be improved upon. And so we'll give you a couple of different kind of pieces of data to help you size this effort. One in particular is like the evidence. So how many times did a particular thing get encountered by a user? So that you kind of have a sense of like, what's the blast radius of this particular pain? And so, for example, the review agent thought that we should be more clear about clarifying fiscal calendar conventions. And when I click into this suggestion, I get a summary of sort of why it's important. I get a little bit of like a diff view of all the different changes that the review agent is suggesting across, in this case, guides, as well as warehouse metadata. And then I see all of the pieces of evidence of the threads that were created where sort of a similar thing happened to a bunch of different people, so that I can get like real concrete examples of where this confusion occurred. And then I can also look at these changes and sort of reject or publish what I might like or not like, or I can push a lot of these things into other systems that like maybe manage my warehouse context, warehouse metadata. And I can pull all these via the CLI, which is what Steve is going to talk about here in a little bit. But that's just a really brief kind of walkthrough of sort of what we built here in the product. And I want to jump back into the deck and just kind of give like maybe another version of what I've just talked about to make sure it's really clear, because I think there's a lot of intricacies here, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's really helpful to just understand like when X happens, then Y is triggered, et cetera. And so what I just described in the product, where you've got the questions happening and all the different surfaces, essentially all those users are hitting our agent harness, and that's kind of triggering all of the different core agent loops and sub-agents, and they're pulling all of the different tools. This is sort of just the natural exploration that's happening in Hex. And when that happens, again, like all of the context that you've curated and created gets pulled in to make sure that those answers are good. And we also are sending all of those conversations into this new suggestions flow, where the review agent is taking a look at it. And then we're also doing that clustering that I mentioned. And then those suggestions are getting created, and then you can push them back into your workspace context. And so this is sort of creating that like self-learning flywheel where you're not having to sort of guess at what this arrow might look like. We're giving you a bit more of like an informed recommendation on that case. So hopefully that kind of illustrated a bit more about sort of what we built and how it works. In the last bit of time here, I'd love to turn it over to Steve, have him introduce himself, sort of his role, and then give him the floor. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Steve. I am the Chief Data Officer at SeatGeek. We are an event tickets marketplace and primary ticketing system, handling some of the largest venues in the country, and have built from a ticket aggregator, I suppose, was what we were when I started. I have been working here for about 14 years, started as a data scientist wasn't a job at the time, but I started as a Wall Street exile who was joining a startup, I guess was my job. And over the last 14 years have been through the many changes. When I first started working here, our data was a 400 megabyte CSV that I ran on a Windows server. Today, it is all in the cloud and being improved in the background on a daily basis by artificial intelligence. So considerably different. Today, we have about 25 people that work across various product and business teams, collecting their data, transforming it, storing it, managing our dbt repository, managing our business intelligence layer, managing our cluster performance, and everything that the teams that you're working on are doing. I myself have run the gamut from designing and building algorithms into the core product, building out experimentation platforms, data pipelines, building out our original cloud data warehousing solution, and hiring a team of people that do all those things far better than I ever did. That is me. Rachel, anything else I should mention there?
No, that was perfect. I think also, I've teed you up with this slide, but would love to hear a little bit more about how SeatGeek is using Hex and what you guys are kind of seeing there, especially with threads.
Yeah, perfect. So Hex is something that we started working with 4 years ago. So right there towards the beginning, I think, of when Hex was coming into existence. We previously had a shared Jupyter Notebook server that we managed in-house, and Hex replaced it almost immediately as the tool of choice for our data scientists and our analysts who began using it to build applications internally. And for, I would say, 3.5 of those years, it has mostly been a development tool and an analysis tool for our analytics team. And over the past really 8 to 10 weeks, that has scaled across the rest of our business. So next slide. Oh, wait. We have about 90 people across the business who are using the Hex threads daily at this point. That was about 10 in early February. And as we've been seeing better and better results, we've been scaling the context within it. And I haven't checked, but I'm sure we're going to hit another record for threads adoption probably today and previously, and for the week, certainly for this week. Next slide. Our overall strategy for how we're deploying Hex threads and agents sort of across the board is to build out a context layer inside of our data warehouse that LLMs access. So the Hex agent accesses this, people's local Claude agents access it, Codex agents access it. And so depending on which part of the organization people are in, I've seen this connected through CoWork directly to Redshift, through CoWork proxied via Hex, Claude Code proxied via Hex, Claude Code directly through Redshift. We have Slack bots that read it. Sometimes the Slack bots are hanging out through sub-agents that are in the middle of merge requests, but everyone's sort of coming after this LLM schema. The reason that we went with an LLM schema is that Semantic layers be damned. The agents and robots are pretty bad at writing joins. And we noticed that pretty much every time a join was, well, not, let me rephrase that. Every error involved an issue with a join. It's not that every join caused an error, but every error was off of a join. Completely agree, Brad. OBT is very agent-centric. So we did not have OBT as our business intelligence layer. We were in a pretty traditional star schema setup. So we have begun building out a sort of one big table wide denormalized agent first layer. And that layer contains very detailed column names and column descriptions. So moving from 10 to 20 character column names that humans understand via context to 50, 60 character column names that the robots will always understand, and then descriptions in them that help them discover at the time of query what the data they're working with is. This is important because every agent session, even with various memory tools, is a new instance of the LLM, and the closer you get the context to the closer you get the relevant context to the time when the agent is going to be writing the query, the better the results that we're getting. Next slide. And so really over the last 3 weeks, we have moved from a homegrown tool that we were using, that we sort of bootstrapped immediately when the Hex thread started taking off, to using Hex Context Suggestions. And I'll be demoing some of the old tool. No, I won't be demoing it because it doesn't run anymore, but I will be showing you the README, and then I will be demoing what we're doing with Hex Context Suggestions now.
Amazing. Yeah, sorry about the slide. The animation was too much for it, I guess. Didn't like that. Okay. So I'll stop sharing and I will turn it over to you, Steve. And be sure, if as y'all are listening, if you have any questions or anything, we've definitely got time for Q&A at the end. So we'd love to answer them.
All right, so just screen sharing our GitLab here. This is the branch from a month ago when I was copying and pasting Hex thread IDs into a Google Sheet that was being picked up into a TSV that we were reading from here. But the overall loop that we were going for was Hex threads. We'd have a thread review agent, and then we would have a backlog management agent and a roadmap. And then we have our own sort of business-focused evaluation suite that we run. And the robot would have this sort of context doc trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to make the fixes? Overall README. This involved a lot of different agents running locally. It was expensive in terms of token consumption for reading through all of the Hex threads, and it was expensive, particularly in the grouping Hex threads and their relevant topics together in order to decide what changes should be made to the data warehouse or the Hex guides or the semantic layer. So we have replaced that workflow, and I'm going to go right here. There we go. Give me some tabs. All right. All right. So we're going to walk through a a quick one here. So as we are transitioning between the old data warehouse and the new LLM schema for LLM usage, we're not moving all data at once. We don't want to move too many things into the LLM schema to avoid confusion for the agents, but at the same time, we want the agent to be able to discover as a second layer anything that is below. This is just working with our customer support data right now. It's been one of the best uses of our LLM schema because the customer support data connects across a bunch of different systems. So people using CoWork, people using our internal Slackbot agent, et cetera, people who are less technical have all been using the LLM Hex Context table for just getting information here. It's also because it's a messy human-entered data set, having the agent here that's both dealing with the joins and logic for querying, but also an agent that knows a lot about natural language and cleaning up data and can identify when something is messy a lot easier than a human can when there's 45 different edge cases in a given user-entered column. CX data has been phenomenal for LLMs, but we've had some text threads with some confusion. I do want to confess that this is staged. I had some people from our data platform team tell the Hex agent that it was wrong about things that I know is wrong are wrong. Highly recommend that for anybody. The number one thing that we have found with Hex Suggestions is that internally making sure that everybody corrects the agent whenever possible, even for nitpicks, and tells it when it's wrong. The Hex agent does not get mad, and the suggestions feature will pick up anytime a user doubts or corrects the agent, and the user correction is really the most impactful that we've found of the features and versions that we get here. So we're going to work on this suggestion here. Hex has suggested a guide and a column description here that mostly aligns with what we're going to do, but we have our own system internally. Remember, these agents are going to this data is going to be exposed to agents far beyond the Hex agent, and we want all agents, even those that do not have Hex's custom analytics harness, to be able to work with this easily. So as I said here, we have our strategy here. It says schema first, then semantics, then skills. And then we have a lot of guides for how we're going to do this in the Claude MD in our LLM schema. We are going to go here. I do not have this set up as a Claude skill yet, both because I have been drifting towards Codex a little bit in the last 2 weeks, and because the Hex guides CLI literally just got added to our account 24 hours ago, and somebody just moved us to API publishing of all our guides, and I haven't changed that yet. So I'm going to do a little mostly pre-cooked demo here. We want to work on a specific suggestion. The wonderful thing about the Hex suggestions versus what we previously had is that they are all themed, so we can use them to have agents work on a very specific part of our data warehouse and architecture. Give it a detailed prompt like this. Important things here, just in case anybody's curious about what I am doing. Number one, personally, I always have the LLM read the documentation of whatever tools they're using, especially if they're not in their training data, like the Hex CLI will not be. You don't want to waste tokens typing Hex suggestions, various flags that don't actually exist that it hallucinates. And then after that, it will download the suggestion and know sort of what Hex thinks that we should do here. We're going to disagree with Hex a little bit, I think, eventually, but that's fine. Very cool part here is that all the evidence is presented to us in thread links. Hex has an MCP, so we can have our agent read through the evidence that Hex has provided and the threads that we have gotten. And then we're going to ask Opus in this case to build out a plan, something I like to do both to save main context or main session context and to get sort of a second layer pass there is to have subagents look at the different parts of the ecosystem there and then have the main agent really determine, okay, these are the parts I'm going to keep, these are the parts that I am going to skip, and then I tell it where to implement it. All right, so we're going to see. This is what happens after we submit that prompt. Now, this second plan is not as good as the first one that it came up with. Figure out why. But it is, oh, I see what happened. All right, this was the second version of this that I did after this one, which already solved the entire issue, and it thinks that the plan already exists. So you're not going to get to see the actual plan that it created here, which is a bummer. I don't think. Yeah, all right, so it actually will. So Claude will come up with a plan here for how we're going to change things. It does think that we are going to want to put a guide in here. I think that the overall, I like the suggestion to put a new guide here. Usually we're going to try to keep it to schema and skills, but when it's disambiguation between what is for the agent and what is for the agent only in a last case scenario, sometimes the domain specific guides can help it if it's lost the workspace rules context of how to sort of generally approach that. And so workspace rules is good, but if you're in a long running thread, it can start forgetting what the workspace rules are, and having a guide to refresh its memory that, okay, this is my first location, this is my second location, can be super helpful. And then it wants to add some column descriptions. So put in information about the data here. This is something that I definitely found super helpful, is to have null information, like what happens if this is null? Is this null? It's really good to have the agent read that right before it writes a SQL query, rather than having to discover that on its own every single time. It can usually figure out from context why that might be null. That's a pretty bad bug. Total time spent in seconds is a string and not an integer. Not great. That's probably in the Zendesk raw data. I don't know. But basically, it knows that we really like to have Booleans. So another thing that's very helpful for agents is, instead of enumerations in your columns, to have like a lot of Booleans. It's going to start looking for those when it greps through your information schema. It's going to try to find columns that match the exact words that it wants to use. Loves Boolean columns for filtering rather than trying to guess what is in an enumerated column. So we've had a lot of improvements to our evals based on adding Booleans. Good thing about those is that you can add as many as you want, and it will almost never make a mistake with them, which is not always the case for non-Boolean fields. Yeah, has a bunch of schema changes in here, and suggests 4 evals that we should add. So evals are basically, we run a script and say, how good is the agent doing? We would want to add these 4 to basically things that would fail before we make these changes that should succeed afterwards. So it's almost like red-green testing for your code itself. And then, it implemented this over here.
Are you finding that when it generates these suggestions in this particular workflow, like it's done a more often than not, you're accepting all of them, or is there another review process there where you're almost like reviewing the reviews review a little bit?
How honest do you want me to be? Yes,
I mean,
I'm almost never accepting sort of completely at face value, suggesting accepting all of the suggestions. Generally, I would be opening up a text editor with the plan, making inline edits to the plan, and having it change that around. So, and then if it was going to create a guide or a skill, I would probably I would probably have Codex review it and say, find, like, this is 150 lines, make it 20 or something like that, and try to go as minimal as possible with the guide until it passed it. So,
of course. And could you speak a little bit to like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying they're not there yet.
Of course. Yeah, no, well, we're getting there. Don't worry.
No.
I do want to spend like maybe just a minute or two on like, I love to understand the time difference between the two worlds, like, and the effort difference. Like, what have you found to be the biggest change there? Like, are you doing something more or less often? Like cost savings? I heard you talk about tokens a lot. Like, could you maybe help like articulate some of those like before and afters?
Yeah, so tokens is big. It used to be that running the analytics robot thread download and review loop was costing us, and this was even on, I think this was even on Sonnet, that would cost, $50 to $100 in tokens just to run that entire thing. Mostly it was because the harness is generally not super effective at like chunking out and reading the hex thread format. So once we worked on that a little bit and we did some JSON parsing, it got a little bit cheaper. But there's no manual work involved anymore, and the sort of groupings of suggestions is considerably better than what we had. So yeah, I would say from a development time perspective, it's maybe a 10-20% speed up, and then from a like actual manual review process, it's, I don't know, 10 hours every time somebody wanted to do this, down to 0. So it's pretty substantial.
Yeah, very cool.
This is it. This is just the pull request that it opened.
Very nice.
So these are evals. Made those, made the hex guide, and changed some things in the schema and added or improved column descriptions. I would say the biggest issue that I have that I have with these, whether it's the column description, whether it's the hex guides, whether it's the schema changes, that the hex, or not hex, any LLM tends to really zero in on the specific thing that went wrong, and tries to add a rule to prevent that from going wrong in the future, versus trying to generalize how that might cause a large swath of problems. I imagine if I had looked at something with 100 pieces of evidence instead of 4 that were canned, we might have gotten a better result than we did on this particular demo. But it's really how does it deal with something that has a wide blast radius? I think the good thing about all of this is humans are still necessary, and hopefully I'm still saying that in a year.
Yeah, likewise.
All right.
Wonderful.
So that's all I got.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for sharing the workflow and kind of how you guys are using this new feature. I feel like I learn so much every time I sort of look at the real world application of all of this, because like I think that's the most exciting part about AI is like once you have the pieces, and if you know how to assemble them in a specific way, you can create workflows that do pretty extraordinary things. And we're just happy that Hex is able to power that workflow with our latest release. I'm looking in the chat. I don't see a ton of questions. I think people were just awestruck by what you shared and quite literally speechless.
Very bored.
No, I hope not. I think this is just like exciting peeking into like what more and more data teams I think are going to start to look and feel like when they're introducing agents into this, like, hey, let's get our data ready for agents, but then B, let's make sure that our context stays relevant and like useful to that agent, which is just kind of like data work. Like, it's never done. Like, your data is going to keep changing and your context is going to keep changing because your business keeps changing. So staying on top of that seems very relevant. We did have one question from Brad. He said, is this enabled for anyone with access to threads, et cetera? Yes. So if you are on, I believe, a Teams or an enterprise plan, if you have access to threads, you should be able to log into the Context Studio if you are a manager or an admin permission level. If you are like an explorer or a viewer or guest or anything like that, you won't be able to see the Context Studio. It's just for admin and managers. And then only admins can actually see all of the threads and the details within them, just because we want to kind of respect privacy there. But managers should be able to, if not very soon, if not already, then very soon, managers should be able to see threads in the Context Studio that have been shared with them or were created by them. So they have a little bit more, like, let's say you've got a team and the team has shared a bunch of threads with you and you want to kind of take a deeper dive there. Cool. Well, any other questions? Okay, we got a few more. Brad is peppering us with questions. Love it. Let's see. Can those recommendations live in any layer, ed.md files or semantic view? I think I'll take a stab, but I think I know what you're asking, which is like maybe when these suggestions get generated and like where do they end up is maybe how I'll interpret that question. I don't know, Steve, if you're interpreting in a different way.
Yeah, so I think he's asking the suggestions in the Context Studio, are they just in the markdown files or are they also in the a semantic view that somebody has imported? And the answer, at the very least, I haven't seen any suggestions for our semantic project, but it will give both recommendations for your guides as well as your column descriptions. I don't know if that's available to everybody or if it's just something that Carlos did after I harassed him enough times.
It should be.
All right.
Yeah, it should run the gamut of guides, warehouse descriptions, semantic models, and workspace context. So all the different context primitives in Hex.
But that one is also in our data warehouse itself. It suggests changes.
Oh, interesting. So maybe that's a new thing.
It might be new. It was a personal request of mine. But if
that's the benefit of, if you get on a webinar with us, we'll open up cool beta features. So if anybody else wants webinar carrots, here you go, throwing them out. Let's see. How often have you seen suggestions provide inaccurate suggestions or identify gaps that are not actual gaps, but just caused by user error? That's a great question.
So it happens a decent amount, but the good part about having a lot of people use it is that, we use the Hex suggestions sort by evidence count descending pretty liberally when we're looking through what to fix. And so things that come up once or twice, like user error that comes up once or twice, is pretty common. And occasionally the Hex suggestions will have an entire suggestion will just be something that's like, okay, we need to have a training seminar on how to use data here a little bit, or how to do it in the AI world. But for the most part, the suggestions are, I don't know, not sort of user error, but they're more about how do we make this something that's very friendly to people whose, chief exposure to data and their vantage point has been very different in the past. So whereas engineers will reference specific tables that exist in the production database, and the finance team will reference the way something is named at the downstream of our semantic layer, and the LLM schema is sort of much more helpful if you have never seen either of those things, because you're just going to ask human words instead of specific things that you've seen in a deck or that you wrote in a table. So an engineer can get very frustrated. The data's not in here. It's like, well, no, it is. You just are, asking it the way that you would tell an OLTP system to give it to you. Just use English like a human, and that usually works. And similarly over there. So it's definitely gaps in how people talk about the business and how people talk about the data. And then we just sort of make a decision of, do we teach synonyms to the LLM? Do we sort of wait for people to forget what the data used to be called? But for the most part, it's not like actual user error, I guess.
Got it. Cool. Let's see. One quick, easy question I can answer: are suggestions surfaced for sensitive threads? The sensitive threads, I believe, are taken into account in like the topic clustering and evidence, but the like actual contents of those threads aren't exposed because they've marked as sensitive, but they are part of sort of the like, is this a thing that we should care about, and should we materialize a suggestion to fix it workflow?
I will say that suggestions is also a pretty good hall monitor, because one of the things, we do not have any sensitive information available to Hex or any LLMs right now. So there's no PII. LLMs can't touch our PII. They can't touch, there's sort of separate layers for any security or customer or financial, well, not all financial information, but like HR, et cetera. Data is all hidden from the LLM harnesses that we use, and people are constantly trying to bypass those protections and are asking Hex about getting, usually for like email marketing or, people who should have access to this information are constantly looking for it in Hex. So the legal team or the risk team or somebody will be asking for PII, and Hex Suggestions is very vigilant about telling them there's no PII, even though it doesn't actually know that these people are allowed to access it.
Well, good to know. We're your eyes and ears out there, taking care of it. Great. Well, I think one last question. I think this is a kind of cool one to end on. A bit unrelated, but would love to hear from your customers. Okay, since we've got you, Steve, you can be our customer. How giving access to data in this way to your stakeholders are impacting sort of like the traditional like BI of it all? Like, how has that sort of shift happened, and like what's sort of the long-term vision you would have for SeatGeek using data in such a way?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I'm a firm believer in dashboards. There needs to be a common sense of metrics. Like the last thing I want is for everybody to have their own dashboard that defines what metrics they care about on a daily basis. As long as, I'm fine with that, as long as there's still like sort of 5 or 6 things that everybody's looking at, because I think that one of the real issues with the LLM era is that people are collaborating with a computer much more than they're collaborating with humans, just because people work at different speeds. And I think that having a shared sense of what metrics are important and what happened yesterday that matters is something that is going to be useful connective tissue across humans the more time they spend interacting with agents. That having been said, and this goes to Brad's question as well, the introduction of Hex threads has been a significant dampener on the use of our traditional BI tools. I think we're at, as we've increased 4x the Explorer usage on a weekly basis, I think we've lost 40% of our weekly active Looker users. And so there's been definitely a one-for-one swap out there, pretty much, of who's using what tools for which thing. Dashboards are holding a little stronger than exploration and analysis for now, but I am definitely thinking through how we're going to make sure that people still have a sort of shared sense of what the data is supposed to be telling them as we individualize their access. And so I think that
Absolutely.
was simply. And yes, we don't, Brad, to answer your question, we haven't really, it's not really the way that our team has operated. We're very sort of self-service and have building blocks to build your own dashboards in there. So we don't get a ton of like dashboard requests because most people have somebody on their team that is familiar enough and able to build their own dashboards. But and we sort of prioritize that as we keep a relatively lean team centralized. But definitely the usage of the dashboarding tools is very, very much reduced. And I think for the teams that had a sort of dashboard specialist, that person has gotten considerably fewer dashboard requests from their own team members. Yeah. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I haven't made a decision yet.
Got it. But it sounds like we've got the sort of self-service threads and then the dashboard, and sort of we're almost maybe at like that crossing of the two, and like which one is sort of going to outpace the other as far as growth and decline maybe. But also it sounds like you're saying one-to-one. Like I think it's interesting to always think about like how do people prefer to interact with their data, and like is the human like asking the question a much more pleasant experience? And I think sometimes yes, it's just a matter of like how good are the answers, because that's really the most important thing at the end of the day is are they getting answers they can trust?
Yeah, from a UX perspective, people like to talk to their data. We have learned that beyond any shadow of a doubt. And the question is how good can we make the answers?
Yep. Great. Well, I think we are right at time. I want to thank everybody for their great questions. Steve, thank you so much for sharing the work that you guys are doing. It looks incredible. And this will be available as a recording. So if you want to catch the chat again or share it around, please feel free to. But until next time, we will see you guys. Have a great rest of the day.